Good evening, everyone. We will call the Monday, May 4, 2015 City Council meeting to order. First order of business is the roll call and determination of the quorum. Charlene.
Scott. Here. Drew. Here. Lewis. Here. Doyle. Wright. Here. Estes. Here. Nordstrom. Here. Roberts. Here. Weifenbach. Lorente. Here. We have quorum.
Thank you. We will now welcome Randy Kreisman from Habitat for Humanity for our invocation. You are welcome to participate, but not required.
Thank you. I am the Faith and Family Relations Coordinator at Black Hills Area Habitat for Humanity. Just to briefly cover what Habitat is, we are a Christian housing ministry in the Black Hills. We cover the 6 counties, and we strive to build homes, communities, and hope for families that are in desperate need for affordable, decent housing in the Black Hills. So if you will please bow your head as we pray. Dear our most gracious Heavenly Father, thank you on behalf of all who have gathered here this evening. Thank you for all of the blessings that you have given us, for life itself, for the measure of health, for sustenance, and for friendship. Thank you for giving each and every one of us the ability to be involved in useful work. Thank you for the blessings that we do not deserve, and we honor you with our actions and willingness to bear appropriate responsibilities here this evening. In the scriptures, you have said that citizens ought to obey the governing authorities, since you have established those very authorities to promote peace and order and justice. So I pray for our mayor, for the various levels of city officials tonight, and in particular for this assembled council. And I am asking that you would graciously grant them wisdom to govern, a sense of the welfare and true needs of our people, confidence in what they are doing, the ability to work together in harmony and in peace. And I pray for the agenda set before them today. Please give them clarity and assurance, and that what we do here tonight would be pleasing to you, and that it would benefit those who live and work in Rapid City. It is in the most blessed name of Christ that I pray. Amen.
Thank you very much, Randy. We're now into the adoption of the agenda. Are there any additions or changes to the agenda from council members or staff? Motion by Scott, second by Estes to adopt the agenda as is. Any discussion? Seeing none, all in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed, motion carries. We have one award and recognition tonight for Motorcycle Awareness Month, a proclamation. If we can invite Darla Drew, council member, down front, along with Janet Olson and Hillary from Abate. proclamation on behalf of the mayor and city council, and Councilmember Darla Drew will read it for us.
Whereas the motorcycle has been an important part of recreation, transportation, and tourism in Rapid City and western South Dakota, and whereas the motorcycle has contributed to governmental activities nationally as well as locally, both in wartime and peacetime, and whereas motorcycle ownership has reached over 8 million in the United States today, with 12,674 in Pennington County alone, and whereas it is important the citizens of Rapid City be aware of motorcycles on the highways and recognizes the importance of sharing the roadway. And whereas motorists should have a special awareness of the vulnerability of the motorcyclist. And whereas education and safe riding habits are worthy of special recognition, and Rapid City is located in one of the 4 safest states for riding motorcycles in the United States. Whereas the month of May begins an annual renewal of motorcycle enthusiasm.
And now therefore I, Sam Quaker, Mayor of Rapid City, do hereby proclaim May 2015 as Motorcycle Safety and Awareness Month. Thank you very much. Any of you want to say anything about Motorcycle Awareness Month? Last call.
Go ahead, Janet.
Go ahead, Janet.
Oh, just want to make one mention that with a lot of the construction that's going on, we are very, cautious in the situations where we have to slow down for any obstacles in the road. So we ask that motorists, give us some space and time to maneuver. We do promote motorcycle safety seminars with our Rushmore Abate group every year, free, and we'll continue to do that. So everybody, just please look twice and save a life. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. We do not have any general public comment items. And with that, we'll go to our City Council President, Jerry Wright, who has a brief announcement that he would like to make. Alderman Wright.
Thank you. I'd just like to announce that Rapid City gained a population of 1 this morning. Grandson named Perry Jerome Wright, born at 851, and he's in Ward 3. Thank you. That'll happen tomorrow.
All right, thank you. Public comment is now open on items 2 through 31. I do not have any, actually we do. We have one speaker request on items 2 through 31 and item 14. And we'll recognize Dr. Wood from Chiropractic Clinic. And while she's coming up, I'll read this into the record. This is requesting the mayor to authorize staff to research and bring back a recommendation on alley access located south of Clearview Lane in the 1100 block of Jackson Boulevard. Go ahead.
Okay.
And if you could state your name again.
Dr.
for the
Camille
record.
Wood, Advanced Chiropractic, 1122 Jackson Boulevard. I'd just like to distribute this city code on parking in alleys, thanks to Jerry Wright. And I think it clearly states that you cannot block an alley at any time, especially between the hours of 8 a.m. and 5 p.m. No blocking or working in the alley. And I'm going to pass these around. Do I hand them to them?
Yes. Thank you very much. Any further comments?
Can I add more?
You may. You have a couple minutes yet.
Quite simply, I think that if Mr. Gonzalez were to move non-working vehicles and non-working small equipment, he would have plenty of room to park and work on his own property. That's all. Thank you.
Thank you. We do not have any further speaker request forms on items 2 through 31. Have I missed anyone? Last call. Public comment is now closed for that section. Any council members want to remove any items 2 through 31 for separate consideration? Alderman Jerry Wright. Jerry?
14 and 25.
14 and 25 so far. Anybody else? Alderman Ron Weifenbach.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Item number 7.
Item 7. So we have items 7, 14, and 25. Do we have a motion to approve the balance? We have a motion by Laurenti and a second by Scott. Any discussion? Seeing none, all in favor say aye. Opposed, motion carries. Item number 7 is a Public Works item, and we'll go to Amanda Scott for that item. Amanda?
Thank you, Mayor. Item number 7 is to authorize staff to advertise for bids for the 9th Street reconstruction project, estimated cost of $2,050,000. I make a motion to approve.
Second.
Motion by Scott, second by Wright, and we'll go to Alderman Ron Weifenbach.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I pulled the item only because I thought it was appropriate to ask a question that, of our Public Works Director. So if you
Proceed.
the question I have is the testing on the roads. When we do like the asphalt testing and the compaction testing, who's responsible for that? Does that come down to the engineers that we hire, or does that come down to the city?
Give a couple answers here. It will depend on whether we hire the construction administration services out to a consultant. This project may very well have a consultant with a consultant inspector on site doing those testing. There also is a chance we may do that with city staff, so it just kind of depends on the workload when this contract is let on whether we will do that in-house or out-house. Ultimately, at the end of the day, we obviously review all of those test results that come in.
Mr. Mayor, it leads to the next question. Do we have any projects that the city does without a consultant?
Yes.
Do we have any going right now?
You restate your question.
Do we have any of those projects going that we don't use an outside project engineer? Like what the city does it all, the design, everything, the testing, all that stuff.
Maybe this was an
I get the point I'm getting to, Mr. Mayor, is that when you drive our streets through town, and it's very obvious that what's happening is that compaction in those streets where we're putting in the water sewer lines, something seems to be missed there, and we don't seem to be catching on to that. It's almost every neighborhood on the new streets. The older streets are almost straighter. They may have a little bit more asphalt damage, but it seems like if we're testing the compaction on those areas that we, or something else, maybe our specifications are not proper. but something's going on there, and I'm trying to figure out at what point, so basically if we hire an engineer, they test the property, if we don't, we test it? Is that what I'm hearing?
Ron, do you mind if I ask this?
Oh, go right ahead.
It sounds like you don't have a concern about the 9th Street project or reconstruction.
Right.
So I think it'd be more appropriate to have a Public Works item, give Terry a chance to research your concerns and address that at Public Works. Is that all right with you?
Yeah, that's fine.
Okay.
Yep.
So if we could arrange for there to be an item on next week's Public Works agenda under items from council members under Ron Weifenbach.
Thank
Sound
you,
good?
Mr. Mayor.
Okay. Any further discussion on this item? Seeing none, all in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed, motion carries. Item 14, Alderwoman Amanda Scott.
Thank you, Mayor. Item number 14 is to request the mayor to authorize staff to research and bring back a recommendation on alley access located south of Clearview Lane in the 1100 block of Jackson Boulevard to the May 12th, 2015 Public Works Committee meeting. I make a motion to approve.
Motion by Scott, second by Drew, and we'll go to Alderman Jerry Wright.
Thank you, Mayor and Council. I met with the three of the owners out in that property, and I did visit with the guy that owns Albert's Repair, Al. And I think there were some things missed the other day at the Public Works meeting in the presentations, and that is that, for instance, no person shall park or drive any vehicle in the alley without notifying the police department except for during the hours of 5:30 p.m. to 8 p.m. It also goes on to state that no blocking can occur in excess of 30 minutes. So I think there's some things that were missed, and I just brought that to your attention. So as we evolve with this, it's not unsolvable, but I think we need to get some neighbors to work with each other, and I think we can. But our ordinance is pretty clear. If they want to just stop and use the alley without calling anybody, they got to do the offloading after basically business hours. During business hours, they got to coordinate it. I think we could get that done. But thank you.
Alderwoman Amanda Scott. Amanda?
Thank you, Mayor. Alderman Wright was unavailable. He had another meeting to attend on the Public Works meeting, but just for clarification, this was to direct this item to go back to staff to thoroughly research it, because this item came before the Public Works Committee meeting, and it was pretty raw at the time. And we had testimony from both sides for consideration of this alley and the history that caused this alley to only have one access at this time, because it used to have an access off Jackson Boulevard. So reason I buzzed in is because Alderman Wright is saying something was missed. In my opinion, it wasn't missed. We're looking for more clarity, but I do appreciate that Alderman Wright spent the time to find this and to direct it to staff to also consider it when they bring back a recommendation. Thank you.
Thank you. Good comments. Anything else on this item? Ron Weifenbach.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I happened to be present on the council when all this took place, and tried to talk the DOT into allowing that access by the chiropractor's office to be open. I guess the question I would ask is that when we bring this back, was there any special provisions made at the time? I mean, I think that'd be about the only thing that could trump our own ordinance. So maybe if we have, between now and then, we can research that. There's no sense of looking at it tonight.
Excuse me, Mayor, if I can answer Alderman Weifenbach.
Is that okay?
Yeah, absolutely.
Ron, basically that was the direction that we sent back to staff, is that there's a lot of history on this item. It involves the DOT, it involves the city, it involves a lot, the reconstruction of Jackson Boulevard. There is a lot, and so that's what we sent it back to staff in order for them to fully research and bring back every pertinent information or every piece of information that is pertinent to this discussion, and then to try to bring us back a recommendation of what they see going forward. So I appreciate your comments, but I would,
That makes sense to me.
yeah,
Alderman Scott.
staff should be able to look into that and bring that back as well.
They had talked about making it a street or whatever, and there was an issue with that. And this is the exact issue we knew was going to arise at the time, and evidently it never did get taken care of. So, thanks.
Alderman Jerry Wright.
And also, for the record, I just wanted to, I read the plating maps that were from the city computer, the lots between the chiropractic clinic and Roush are not right-of-way, they're actually lots. So there never was public right-of-way through that property. Thank you.
Anything further on this item? All in favor, say aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion carries. Item 29, we'll go to Alderman Chad Lewis. 25.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Item number 25 is Resolution 2015-045, supporting the month of May as 2015 as South Dakota Wildfire Awareness Month. I move an acknowledgement. Is that the correct motion?
It's a move to approve.
Move to approve, excuse
Motion
me.
by Lewis, and second by Nordstrom. And we'll go to our fire chief, Mike Maltaverne.
Thanks, Mayor. And as stated, this resolution is really to support the month of May as South Dakota's Wildfire Awareness Month. And with us tonight, we have a couple gentlemen from out of town that came in from the Bureau of Land Management. And I'll introduce Mike Donenberg. He just wanted to say a couple of words about some programming that's going on in Rapid City and a presentation he's doing tomorrow night.
Good evening.
Good evening.
Good evening, Mr. Mayor. My name is Mike Dannenberg. I work for the Department of Interior, Bureau of Land Management, and I am the state lead for Montana Dakota's Community Assistance. And I'm here to talk tonight about supporting the proposition of Wildfire Awareness Month. I think everybody in this room is aware that Rapid City is not immune from natural disasters, floods, tornadoes. Lord knows you might get a little snow every now and then. But one of the most common things that you're going to see just about every summer is wildfire. You have an opportunity here to support the wonderful work that Chief Maltaverne and Lieutenant Tim Weaver have done in making Rapid City a nationally recognized leader in protecting people's homes from wildfire. The fire department, the veterans program that you support so well, in your Firewise program just received a national award for the work that the fire department has done and that you have supported very, very well. But tonight you have an opportunity to ask the general public to take responsibility. This is an opportunity for us to reach out to the public and get them to take responsibility. Wildfire is one of the few, if not the only, natural disaster that can be mitigated through hard work at the local level. So I come to you tonight asking for your support, your leadership in making Wildfire Awareness Month a reality. Thank you.
Thank you. Lieutenant Weaver, did you have anything that you'd like to add? No?
No, not unless there's any questions.
Okay, we'll go to Alderman Jerry Wright. Jerry?
To provide the emphasis that they're asking for, I do suggest to our community that we do everything we can to prepare ourselves and minimize the risk of wildland fire, because those of us around Westbury witness it. We've seen it at the Galena fire and other occasions, and it's terrifying and can destroy a lot of property real quick. And luckily, we have not much of loss of life, but I would encourage our entire community, not only Rapid City, but our entire area, to take preventative action and work with Tim and everybody else. Thank you.
Thank you. Well stated. Any further discussion? We do have a motion for approval. All in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion carries. We are now on public comment for items 32 through 97. Public comment is now open for items 32 through 97. So far, I have one speaker request form for this section, and that's Mike Whalen on item 36. Mike Whalen, item 36. Sir, the floor is yours. Good evening.
Good evening. For the record, I'm Mike Whalen, a local attorney. I've spoken more than a few times with regards to the same subject, and I'm here with regards to, I believe it's agenda item number 36. And in that regard, I'm here to speak in support of the amendment as proposed to the 2012 IRC regarding expansive soils. I want to bring to your attention the fact that the geology on the west side of Rapid City is drastically different than the geology on the east side. That's proven out by the USGS maps. They're available online now, I discovered this morning, and you can do your own comparison. These maps show that with regards to the east side of Rapid City, the east side of Skyline Drive, there are 5 expansive soil groups. And they account for about 80% of the naturally occurring soils. By and large, these soils are unsuitable for footings, foundations, and slabs unless precautions are taken. The bentonite in these soils retain water, causing massive heaving, cracking, and movement. Without action, the homeowners, that's your constituents, are forced to spend sometimes as much as $100,000 or more in remediation, or do what some do, which is sort of half-hearted, and that is patch and sell or resell. There are several folks here tonight who have already explained or told their story to this distinguished body. There are others who have not yet, who I know to be litigants in lawsuits now pending. And it is a heartbreaking story when these folks lose their home. Tonight's amendment is a compromise. When I drafted the initial ordinance for consideration, I identified the 5 groups and pegged the ordinance to those 5 expansive soil groups. However, that's not what's before you now. What's before you now, as it reads, would require a geotechnical evaluation by a design professional. I emphasize evaluation because that's not necessarily full-blown soil testing, rather a consultation. For those people on the west side of Skyline who have greater concerns over gypsum and the like, and do not have nearly the amount of expansive soils, this consultation would be of minimal cost. Thus, the bane of those on the east side would not necessarily become the problem of those on the west side. On the east side, however, soil testing might be indicated by that evaluation by a geotechnical expert. That evaluation could save hundreds of thousands of dollars for many, many homeowners. It would also relieve those inclined to sell their home, patch and sell, from that duplicity. That has occurred, and one of the litigants that I mentioned earlier, who's here tonight, has been a victim of that non-disclosure, of that hazardous condition as identified by the South Dakota legislature. One last comment. To my knowledge, there has not been one single case in court, filed, lawsuit commenced, where there was the situation where the expansive soils were over-excavated and replaced with engineered fill. Not one case. All the other cases are where there was construction on so-called virgin soil, or the precautions were generally ignored. I urge adoption of the proposed amendment. Thank you.
And we have one more speaker request form on item 36, and that's from Jeff Loggy, representing Black Hills Home Builders. Good evening, Jeff.
Good evening. Mr. Whalen has covered a lot of information here. You know, I'm not going to reiterate what we've already gone through before. We know where we're at. I've had a lot of calls lately, so I'm going to pass forward kind of the two sides that I've received a lot of calls on based on the last meeting as well as the journal article that went through. You know, and it's the calls I get are primarily based on builders in certain areas of town. You have builders on certain areas of town who primarily build on the west side or, you know, southwest side, where they don't feel if this is truly a shifting soils issue or an expansive soils issue, which isn't as prevalent in those areas, that perhaps the issue, and this was discussed in the committee, perhaps using that USGS map, overlaying the city streets somewhat onto that, or using a more current data and just do soils testing in those affected areas. That was a lot of concern I got from a lot of builders, and not to say some of them don't build on the other side of town, and I did get a lot of calls where they understand, you know, the issue that's out there nowadays. You know, we're building in areas we truly hadn't built in the past, and it just keeps growing to the east, and we know what's out there now. You know, the other side of this is, you know, truly the affordable side. And, you know, and affordable is always extra cost that goes into a house. You know, this can be, you know, a $500 issue, or this could be several $1,000 issue. But remediation is quite expensive also. So, you know, I've got comments from both sides. You know, let's not mandate this. Let's have builders, you know, be informed and do the right thing, and not be mandated into this. And you know, I don't know, you know, exactly how that goes, or I've got the comment of amend this and just let's do these, you know, this soils analysis, or I forget the words right now that was used, and do that in the areas where the expanding soils are the most prevalent. So, you know, I kind of leave it up to you. It's a very tough issue because it can be very expensive. Is it going to affect housing costs? Yes, if you have to go in and do over excavation. You know, is it affecting the areas where the most affordable housing is being built? Yes, it is. And, you know, it is a tough call. I've talked to many of you up there. And, you know, it is probably the most difficult issue I've dealt with, as, you know, being in government affairs, because you can see both sides of the coin, and I've seen it firsthand. So, you know, if you decide to amend this and just to deal with the areas that are the most prevalent based on the USGS map, understandable. But that is my comments, and if you have any other questions, I'm more than happy to answer them.
Thank you very much. We do not have any more speaker request forms on this section of items from 32 through 97. Have I missed anyone? Okay, public comment is now closed on those items. We are now on item number 32. Alderman Chad Lewis.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Item number 32 is second reading of ordinance 6047, supplemental appropriation number 2 for 2015. I recommend approval.
Second.
Motion by Lewis, second by Drew. Any discussion? Seeing none, all in favor say aye. Opposed? Motion carries. 33.
Item number 33 is first reading of ordinance 6046, an ordinance separating the city's vision and capital improvement accounts into separate funds by amending Chapter 3.16 of the Rapid City Municipal Code. I yield the floor.
Floor has been yielded. Alderman Jerry Wright.
For the purpose of discussion, I make a motion to approve.
Motion by Wright, second by Laurenti. Any discussion? Any discussion? Seeing none, all in favor say aye.
Yeah, I have one
Opposed?
discussion.
Motion carries with 1 no.
Wait a minute. I was just bringing my lights in. I bring my light in before you called.
I was calling for the vote, so we'll go ahead and cancel the vote. All right, vote's been canceled. We'll go back to the motion that's on the floor. We'll go to Alderman Chad Lewis.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Quick question for Pauline Sumption, the finance officer. Pauline, if I may?
Yeah.
Pauline, so currently, the way the accounts are, what's the difference between what it is now and what it was before, I guess would be the question, as far as accounting goes?
To be honest, the only thing that will be different will be the presentation and the annual financial statements. We're still accounting for everything separately downstairs in my office, where we know to the penny how much belongs to the Vision Fund and how much belongs to the CIP account.
Okay. So there is essentially, and the benefits of having this is the way it currently is right now are, as I know it's in the record, but could you state it, maybe explain a little better?
Right now, and you guys have all read the memo from Doherty and Company, they believe that we're the only city in the state that actually splits our second penny, not only 2 ways, but then a third way on top of it with a utility support fund. So by doing it this way, basically, it will give us a better coverage on any debt, whether it's for the Vision Fund or the Vision account or the CIP account. And in turn, that lowers the interest rate typically when you have a higher coverage ratio.
Thank you. I yield.
Alderman Jerry Wright.
Thank you. I know that on this issue, there's been a lot of concern and discussion, but I think that we need to have the perception that when we did this under the advisement of our bond counsel and our finance officer, we were looking at the best rates for the city of Rapid City, and that's our taxpayers. And I calculated that 0.5% of interest, which is probably what we would save by having our resources combined or something like that, would give us a savings in interest rates. That's what we were told by our bond counsel. So I assumed a 0.5% difference if we had a strong ledger side. Well, in a 0.5% over 20 years and $1 million is $48,000. In a $10 million project, it's $480,000. In a $100 million project, it's $4.8 million. Those are additional costs and interest if we don't have the, quote, combination of the funds for financial purposes. So I think it made a lot of sense in what we did, and I still support that. If this is just basically an academic or a process to make it clear, but in essence, what we need to do is take the action that will guarantee the city, the taxpayers, the best result in interest. Thank you.
Alderman John Roberts.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and I have a few questions, and I don't know who I would direct them to. My question is being, on this new ordinance, or we're going to be adding a year onto the Vision Fund. So where does that year's worth of Vision Fund money go? If we don't go directly to building a new civic center, where does that money go?
Go to our city finance officer, Pauline Sumption. And not to name names, we have some sidebar conversations going on, so Pauline, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. It actually will just accumulate in the account. So the money, when we do go to the next round, will still be there to allocate out or do whatever with at that time.
And I have another question, because if you go down to C in this ordinance 2.3, we talk about the projects being finished by the end of the 5 years, which is 2015. So we're just going to have a year of nothing.
Theoretically, that would be true, but the likelihood that these projects are all going to be done by the end of 2015 is probably pretty slim, and you will probably grant extensions like have been granted in the past, is my
So we may
crystal
have
ball.
some extra money for the powwow grounds that I'm hoping we'll have.
There is a possibility.
Well, that would be good. Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor.
Alderwoman Amanda Scott.
Thank you, Mayor. I'd like to make a motion to deny and retain the floor if I can get a second.
We have a substitute motion to deny and a second by John Roberts. And you have
Thank
the
you.
floor, Amanda.
Thank you. This is the first time that this has come into a meeting that I've been at, so I'd like to just review the process in which this happened, because there has been a lot of discussion from the public, and a couple people in the public, when they keep tying this to the recent vote on the Civic Center, they were two distinctly different things. Just to recall everybody's attention to this, it was Alderman Estes and myself when we first brought this ordinance to light, that both Alderman Estes and I are the ones that objected to this, and I'll let you know why. Up on the dais, if you go back and check the records, our concern at the time was that the Vision Fund would be overcome by the CIP fund when we looked at this ordinance the first time. We spent a meeting with the city attorney, and Alderman Estes and I asked the city attorney a lot of questions. We wanted clarity. We already covered that question of having that year and let the fund build up, and we also knew that there was extra projects out there that we were going to run short of funds, or the potential of short of funds. One was the soccer field complex at the time, because this goes back to almost a year ago at the time. So we knew that by putting in this year of letting the Vision Fund money be there, it would allow us that cushion, since recently in the 5-year plan we had so many Vision Funds that went well over budget. 5 years prior to, when they were estimated, the cost of construction just soared. I mean, the Horace Mann pool went over budget, and so we had to make up funds from there. So putting this extra year in for this Vision Fund, the funds are still separated. Alderman Estes, and if I'm speaking out of turn, Alderman Estes has corrected me before. I'm sure he will speak in and correct me. But our concern at the time was that the CIP fund had the potential of overtaking the Vision Fund and not being able to hear from the public to make sure that the quality of life and the economic development projects could be vetted out. Our city attorney went through historically and checked out how we had managed the Vision Fund committees in the past. And one of the points of contention was that when the Vision Fund was 3 different kind of criterias that they were looking at, it was hard to get 3 different public citizen committees to vet out economic development and then quality of life, and I'm missing one. Economic development, infrastructure, and civic improvements, which I consider quality of life. Yes. So, so to get, like 15 people to come up with 3 5-people groups, that was hard. So it was recommended that we come up with 1 citizen committee, because the other problem in the Vision Fund committees is that a public interest group would bring a project forward and they would try to fit it into one of those categories, when a lot of times the public quality of life may fit into both economic development and infrastructure, as well as the quality of life. And so trying to cubbyhole or pigeonhole those little projects, it just made more sense to come up with 1 citizen committee to bring forth those projects so that you didn't have different public projects competing with each other. They could all be valued by a committee that made the recommendation to the city council. So I know Alderman Lewis really hates it when we go on and on and on up here, but I did want to bring some clarity, because this was well vetted out, and we actually continued it to make sure that we had all of our questions answered, to make sure that these 2 funds were staying materially as is, and the only reason to combine them was the benefit for either a Vision Fund project or potentially in the future even a CIP project, that due to the bonding capability or the banks looking at this, that we would be able to get the best interest rate possible. And that was the true purpose of this ordinance, and I still support that. Thank you, Mayor, for the latitude.
I'm not sure I understand that, because now we have a motion to deny what she actually just spoke for. I mean, the point when I brought this forward...
Spoke for the motion to deny.
Yeah, I mean, the changes in here don't change the committee or anything like that, my understanding.
That's 34. We're on,
I'm talking about
we're
the
on
wrong.
33.
We're talking about amending the 6018, right?
Right. We're talking about the ordinance separating the city's vision and capital improvement accounts into separate funds.
First, it's important to understand it. I didn't want to get into this crazy explanation of basic finances, but when you have a credit card and you're approved for a credit card or whatever, and you have a monthly revenue or a yearly revenue, right? The creditor looks at your revenue and says, "Can you afford this credit card?" Presently, our city is in a 0 balance on the Vision funds. We owe nothing, because of the foresight of the previous councils to say, hey, listen, we're not going to put you into that situation and max out your credit card. This was put together, and the only reason that the 2 accounts were put together was so that they had enough ability to max out the credit card, to max out the payment. It had nothing to do with the bond ratings or the interest rate or anything about that. What it did was allow the city to circumvent a process that was put in effect by the state law that said, listen, Rapid City, you only got this much available to borrow. So we came up with an idea that said, okay, we're not going to borrow it. We're going to use the leaseback loophole to get around it, and then we're going to max out our revenue stream, and then we're going to add this other revenue stream to it so we can prove to you that we have enough money to pay it back. It's ridiculous. If you look at what our CIP funds are right now, they are committed. This next year we'll have a surplus. The following year we'll have a slight surplus. We are using the CIP funds to fix infrastructure improvements in our city. Yeah, it may be a fact that maybe when you go to the bond council and say, hey, what would be the best idea? And the guy's selling you the bonds, that's how he makes his money, and we're going to rely on him to say, oh yeah, you should combine them so you could borrow more money from me so I can make more money. Just consider the source when you ask somebody a question like that. You go to the car dealership and they say, well, I want to buy a car. And the guy says, well, you can afford a Mercedes-Benz. When in actuality, he says you should be driving a GMC Yugo or something. And so it's important to, when we talk about these things and we don't get sidetracked by what someone told us that doesn't have any truth to the matter. The matter was the fact that they wanted to put the two accounts together. The revenue streams are still there. No matter what you do, they're still there. So combining them does nothing. Our bond ratings were increased in 2013, nothing to do with 2015. So separate them out. I mean, this is the first time I've ever witnessed something that got approved, and then all of a sudden we just backtracked and said, oh, we're not going to take that vote. We're going to do another vote, and then we're going to turn around. We're going to deny that same vote that we just approved. So I don't know, unless somebody has a better answer than I do. I don't think it's a good idea to max out our debt. Thanks. Oh, and then put another account in jeopardy of it. I mean, if you can't pay it, it's coming out of there. There's no way around it. And that's the reason for it, because this council will soon be gone. There will be another council, and they'll be dealing with the same issue.
Just before we go to the next three lights, I want to clarify something. If you've watched me run the meetings before, you know I run a fast meeting. Nobody had hit their light, and as we were voting, people started hitting their lights. So out of respect to you guys, we stopped the vote, but keep in mind that this was first reading anyway, and it would have had to come back for second reading. So my preference would be that we have this discussion at second reading, but we're having it at first. But
Mr. Mayor,
I wanted to just make sure you
and
I
I
were
agree
on the
with
same page.
I agree with your philosophy, but I've sat in on several meetings that you didn't chair that same thing happened to me, and I just sucked it up. So I appreciate it.
Alderman Brad Estes.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I think as I look at this, you know, I think my friend Mr. Weifenbach's talking about the obligation that the people voted on regarding the Civic Center. You know, that dollar amount of construction had a certain amount of obligation. The obligation was that of the Vision Fund. It was not the obligation of everything else other than the Vision Fund. Having these combined allows, you know, it can be to the benefit of the CIP side or the Vision Fund side. It's no different than a couple buying a house, and they have to become comfortable with the obligation that they're that they're about to take on. And as you're writing the story to the lender as to how much these, you know, the husband and wife have, the more debt service coverage ratio they have, the better the interest rate they can qualify for. You still have to be comfortable with the obligation. We're not changing the obligation. We're not changing how much money goes into the CIP, and we're not changing how much goes into the Vision. This may very well benefit the CIP later on if we do some bonding and borrow some money for the CIP. As it sits right now, and thank you, Alderwoman Scott, for reminding me of the time we spent together talking about this. Right now, everything's in a holding pattern. As I understand that the way this ordinance was passed when we combine these two, that we sit a year, there's no Vision Fund committees, and it sits a year, and this year's money, the Vision money, is going to go into account, and we'll have cash. We have cash available. And we've got the clocks ticking with the agreement with the Department of Justice. And who knows how much? Who knows? Once we get to talking about the Civic Center again, I guess after the election, whether we're going to talk about building a newer version, you know, a smaller version, or if we're going to just talk about ADA. But whatever the solution is, it's going to require some significant financing. Darn sure isn't going to be $180 million. We all know that. It could be $30 million. It could be $70 million. Don't know. But whatever it is, we're going to have to borrow that money. We're not going to have that cash. And whatever money we borrow against, if the Civic Center is done out of the Vision Fund, that we're going to borrow against that stream. I just don't see any reason right now, until we know what we're going to do at the Civic Center, to worry. Nothing's hurt to worry about getting this split up. Nothing's hurt. The monies are still going into the same accounts. we've not obligated any of it. The people spoke on the obligation of the Civic Center, and that's gone away. Nothing more than the Vision Fund was obligated in that particular question. Again, it comes down to deciding whether or not the people are comfortable with the obligation. You know, and you talk about, well, combining them jeopardizes the other fund. Does that mean that if we had a failure, if the funds were split and we had a devastating, catastrophic financial event in this city, would we just walk away? I mean, when do you decide to walk away from something? I mean, does it make it easier to walk away from something and default on something just because the funds aren't tied together? You still have to make that hard decision, you know, so, and combining them doesn't lock you into that decision. So I'm going to support the substitute motion. Thanks.
Alderman Chad Lewis.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I guess Mr. Estes did an excellent job of saying a lot of what I was going to say, but basically, one thing to remember, folks, if we did ever have any shortfalls in one of these payments, would have been for the Civic Center. We weren't talking like $10 million or anything like that. It probably been $1 or $2, $3 million, and we have, whether you like it or not, we have $100 million in funds or reserves basically in this city, which I know you want to spend in the reserves, but they're there for a reason, emergencies. We always have about $2 million undesignated cash every year that we have. That's undesignated cash. So we have other sources. I can't see anybody in the world rating streets and infrastructure to make those payments. I just don't think anybody would do that. Granted, I can't speak for the future, but I think that with those kind of resources behind us, that was never really going to be a problem. And I said, you know, before the vote that we're going to use the Vision funds to either fix it or build a new one. So I was obviously advocating for a new one, but the people spoke; they wanted something else. So. But Mr. Estes made a great point. We're going to have to use the Vision funds, whatever we do, because we don't have that kind of money just laying around unless we want to spend our reserves to do it. But I don't think anybody wants to do that. So, I can read the last paragraph of the letter from Doherty and Company, who was a financial advisors on this, and they're actually trying to save us money. They might make money off of bonding, but they also are trying to point out the fact the main reason for maintaining one fund with separate accounts is that it provides the city with the most flexibility and potentially could lessen borrowing costs for any projects payable from either the CIP or Vision expenditures. At the same time, separate accountability can be maintained just as well, whether the separate accounts within within a fund or separate funds. Potential cost savings are mainly from the lower interest costs due to maintaining the current AAA rating or better rating. Savings may also be obtained because investors' perceptions of future financing, and in some cases, it may allow the city to shorten the maturity schedule while maintaining a higher debt service coverage ratio. I think that kind of speaks for itself, and obviously it's kind of wordy, but the point being is, as Mr. Estes said, you know, if you're a married couple, you have two incomes, you get better debt ratio, and you get better interest rates. So I'll be supporting the substitute motion. Thank you.
Alderman Richie Nordstrom.
Thank you, Mayor. I'm going to try to simplify this a whole bunch. I'm going to support the motion that's on the floor to deny. What I'm holding here, folks, is a couple of pennies. And just very simply, 1 penny goes into the general fund. We set aside that money for the general fund. What the debate about is this second penny and splitting it up. The way I like to describe it in very simple terms is we're cutting this penny in half. And the crumbs that are left over goes into the 0.16 committee fund portion of it. Now, the way I'm looking at this second penny, I believe it is more attractive to the investor to see a full penny instead of seeing 2 pennies, or a penny split in half. Mr. Weifenbach, he and I do work together, although it doesn't seem like it at sometimes, but we do get along, and we try to work hard together for the community as a whole. What we are looking at here is, on Mr. Weifenbach's proposal, is that it would take away flexibility from the city. And that is a great concern for me. If we don't have our flexibility to do the bonds and everything else that we need to do with it, either on the vision side or even on the CIP side. It makes it, that second penny is less attractive to be able to do that bond. The other part of it, I thought, and the feedback that I got back when I was out visiting the people in the neighborhoods, is checking in with them occasionally, and I still do that now, is that it wasn't so much the splitting of the funds or putting them together or combining them or splitting them apart again. The real concern that I heard back from the voters is the $180 million. That was too much money. They haven't been able to give me another different number on that, so that is to be coming down the road. And I do want to try to simplify one other thing. The city used the lease back process during the first Civic Center bonding, and that's how it was successful in my mind. That was one of the driving points that was successful. Mr. Weifenbach refers to a loophole in the system. One of the processes that we used or looked at several years ago was a lease back process. Now that is a genuine loophole that people were going to try from out of state were going to take advantage of us. And I didn't like that process, whereas the lease back process did work. Now there's a lot more smarter people that can explain it how that works, but they are different. And with that, I just want to make sure that the public understands that second penny is much more attractive when it is put together. Thank you, Mayor. I'll yield the floor.
Alderwoman Darla Drew.
Thank you, Mayor. I think I'm one of the few people on this council that actually had to apply for and did receive vision funds through one of the projects I worked on. And it is a long and arduous process. It's rather vague and sometimes difficult and somewhat tedious. However, that's why I'd like to see the funds kept together, because a lot of the projects that come before this group would cross-pollinate. They would be either CIP or also infrastructure, civic improvement and economic development. So I can see that this would kind of cut down on the amount of meetings that you'd have to have with groups to apply for vision funds or for your projects. And we actually did hear from Chief Multivern on this, that he thought keeping the funds together for his project, upcoming projects, would be the best thing to do. So I would like to see these two funds kept together, so I will be voting for the substitute motion.
Thank you. Alderman John Roberts.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And I just wanted to clarify, when I seconded Amanda's motion, it was for discussion because I do not support it. One of the things that's been brought forward to me quite a bit since this came up and came out on to the council agenda is a lot of people feel like we're just keeping this in place so we as a council can have just as much money as we want to spend on the Civic Center, so we can try to bring it forward again, and hopefully next time it'll pass. A lot of people really do have that concern that I've talked to, and that's why I will not be supporting this. I wish that we would separate these two funds. I think that the taxpayers spoke, and I think that that's what they wanted, but that's just my opinion. Thank you.
Alderman Ron Weifenbach.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And again, I feel it. I wish I had a whiteboard up here so I could make it simple for people to understand. Basically, you have $11 million vision fund, $11 million CIP funds. I'm rounding them off for you. When the people went to vote, the Civic Center, they were talking about a finance package. They weren't talking about the Civic Center. They were talking about a finance package that maxed out this $11 million a month. It was going to take every penny of that vision fund to pay that $180 million. Do we understand that part? I think that's pretty simple to understand. So basically, if that's all the money that you have is $11 million and you're going to spend it all every year, you're going to spend, you think anybody's going to lend you the money on that? No. So they took the money from the CIP, put them together so they had debt service coverage. The people of Rapid City voted overwhelmingly to say, listen, we don't want you spending that kind of money. This still allows the council to do this. to spend this money all over again, and it has to be referred all over again. Basically, what the citizens of Rapid City said to you and to us was, we don't want to spend that kind of money. We want you to spend what you can afford, including the debt service coverage, in the money that you have. These people up here liken this conversation to somebody getting a mortgage. Trust me, I know how to do mortgages. I've been doing it for 30 years. Doesn't take a rocket scientist to figure out when you max out your debt, what your debt income ratios are. Typically, a qualified mortgage allow you to go to 45% of your debt service coverage. That means 45% of $11 million would be a realistic mortgage payment for the city of Rapid City. That mortgage payment was so large that the state did not allow the city of Rapid City to bond for that. So they were going to lease it. So when they talk about interest rates, it had nothing to do with the bond rates. It had everything to do with the fact that the state allows the city of Rapid City only to bond for this much money. So to get around that, we said we'll do a lease. The state of South Dakota does not recognize a lease as debt service because if you can't make the payment, as has mentioned here, some catastrophe, well, the fact is we don't have to pay it. The city council could have said, you know what, this year we don't want to pay that lease payment because that maxes out all the money we got coming into that one fund. Anybody in their right mind, rocket scientist or not, intelligent or not, and more intelligent than me, wouldn't be that hard, would say, don't max yourself out. The citizens of Rapid City voted to tell us, if we would listen, don't max yourself out. Simply, I'll go on the record today saying that is my position. If somebody doesn't understand it, I'll spend a lot of time with them to try to get them to understand the fact that if you can afford a Ford Focus, you should not be buying a Mercedes-Benz. Simple as that. It's simple. If you go to the Mercedes-Benz dealer and he says to you, well, you can afford it, you can just max yourself out, we'll just go by your credit score, we won't even look at your income, he's probably going to sell you a Mercedes-Benz. And he's going to tell you what, it's the best thing for you. Thank you.
Alderman Steve Laurenti.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and I have a question for the finance officer, if I could, please.
Please do.
Pauline, can you give me a round figure of, without the funds together, or without a lease back, what's the city's current ability to bond based on our current debt service?
Let me look that up.
Doesn't have to be exact.
The total debt limit is right about $228 million to go through a conventional financing scenario with revenue bonds like we've had in the past. Now, I want to say that we had about $132 million left in that debt limit at the end of 2014.
What was that last figure? 113?
132.
132 million. Okay. Does having just the Vision Fund support that?
If we wanted to max out the city's debt, yes.
From a bond standpoint?
From a revenue bond standpoint, the Vision Fund could take out a $132 million revenue bond.
Okay, thank you. And then maybe the finance officer can answer this question, or maybe it will take the city attorney as well. But I think I've asked this before because we've talked a little bit about it. But what I want to know, Joel or Pauline, if you will, if this is dissolved, what does it take for us to put it back together?
You would just need to adopt an ordinance amendment that essentially we would just keep amending the ordinance. So we just undo your action. If you were to separate them tonight, we would just undo that in the future.
Thank you, Joel. And the reason I asked that question is because it was floated that we could have some catastrophe, but the fact of the matter is, which would be unbelievably rare, but the fact of the matter is the Vision Fund alone, maxed out, is still $130 million. I don't know what kind of catastrophe we're talking about, but I think it's disingenuous to say that we need to keep these funds together for some unseen catastrophe when our bonding capability begin, realizing that a maximum of $130 million, I can't imagine, and I would hope that we wouldn't have such a catastrophe, but we've just recently combined these funds. This isn't something that we're undoing, that we've had since the inception of the Vision Fund. This is very new. We did it because we had a $180 million potential obligation with the Civic Center. So for the first few years of that financing, it was going to be very close for the Vision Fund to make those payments. But the Vision Fund was easily, in the long run, going to pay for that $180 million, and I supported that back then. But I don't support keeping the funds together. One, because they're easily brought back together if we needed to do so. And I think it would be good for us as a point of good measure for the public to hear that the financing mechanism for the $180 million that they voted decisively no on, 60-40, see that financing undone so that we come back. And if they come back with a new plan, and that new plan is $60 million and we're doing just ADA, or we're doing $30 million, or $80 million, or $100 million for some smaller building, if that ultimately is it, or even $115 or $120 million, we have the capability still with the Vision Fund. And if we agree as a council that we need to bring them back together, or the majority of us, which is all it's going to take, then we're going to do the right thing. So I just want to make sure that we're easy with our comments about wanting to keep these funds together. It just seems a bit disingenuous to say we need to keep them together and sort of put some fear into the fact that we need to do that because we may have a catastrophe that would necessitate these two funds to be together. We have all the flexibility we need because this council has the ability to bring this financing back together if we so needed to do that. And I think there would be the will to do that if it was necessary. And it doesn't sound like, after hearing the city attorney say what it would take, to bring it back together. So let's do the right thing at this point. Let's dissolve this financing. Let the public know that we'll come back with a new plan on the Civic Center, and if we need to bring it back together, we'll bring it back together. Thank you.
We'll go to our City Finance Officer, Pauline Sumption. Pauline.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I just want to clarify a couple things. The $132 million is what is allowed in our constitutional debt limit. With the revenue that the Vision Fund was generating, we could have done a $146 million bond and had 1.25% coverage. Part of the combination of the two funds into one was to have 150% coverage to get that interest rate lower. So that's where that comes into play. As far as the financing package is dead. The vote did that. Doherty's not working on it. Dorsey and company are legal advisors on this. They are not working on it. It is dead in the water with that vote. However, if there were to be another financing package, it would have to come back to this council in a resolution form. So whether you have the accounts in one fund like we currently do, that doesn't mean that the financing is going to happen, because all of you still have to vote, and if the public doesn't like it, they will tell you. I firmly believe they will tell you. So just for those two clarifications, there's no financing involved with this ordinance anymore. There's nothing out there. I'm not working on anything.
And thank you, Pauline. And I think to that point, that's exactly why I'm saying maybe we should dissolve the fact that we have them together, because we ultimately will be able to bring them back together if we need to. Thank you.
Alderman Jerry Wright.
I think there's a lot of discussion that's absolutely confusing the public. And number one, I'd like to ask Pauline a question, or Joel. The ordinance specifically says how the revenue is collected and how it can be expended, correct? We can't deviate and take money out of the Vision Fund and spend it on CIP without at least council action, but the ordinance specifically says this percent goes here and this percent goes there, correct?
That is correct.
And also, the reason we put this together the way we did was in the interest of saving interest, correct? And I just said earlier that 0.5% in interest difference is equivalent to $48,000 over a 20-year bond issue of $1 million, correct? Are we not responsible to how we spend the taxpayers' money? The answer is yes, we are. And by saving interest costs, we are doing that. So I think that there's a lot of discussion out there that's terribly misleading to the public, And by the combination, it was strictly done for funding and financing, had nothing to do with how the money would be spent. The ordinance is very clear. Thank you.
Alderman Brad Estes.
Hey, thank you, Mr. Mayor. Alderman Laurenti, I appreciate you reminding me that 60% of the people voted against 180 million. I was one of the ones up here that voted against the Civic Center. I think you voted for it. To suggest that I'm disingenuous, I was not trying to scare anybody into anything. There was a suggestion that we were putting the CIP funds at risk. But like everybody said, the 180 million, that question's moot, it's gone. But the obligation of that, the payment of that 180 million pre-election was what the Vision Fund was. And we talk about the only way the CIP could be at risk if that would have passed would have been if something would have happened. And then if something would have happened and that Vision Fund would have dropped and you would not have been able to make that payment, we would have had a hard decision to make. Then you got to decide if you dip into the CIP. You got to decide when to walk away. I wasn't trying to scare anybody, but the only way you put the CIP fund at risk, if that would have passed, something would have happened, and that tax projection would have gone backwards, not forwards, as it was projected. Thank you.
Alderman Chad Lewis.
I guess I'm just backing up what Mr. Estes said. I don't know if I was the one who was referring to the catastrophe or not. I was just trying to point out that we have other means of paying those, so I would never raid the CIP to pay any obligations that were out there for the Vision Fund, and I don't think it was going to be more than a couple $1 million possibly anyway. I mean, I have no idea, actual numbers, but I don't think it was ever intended, and I think, once again, we're just getting a better interest rate on anything we do in the future. And it's not, once you said, if we really think it's wrong, we can always tear it apart in the future, but I think there's no reason to change it right now. We're going to have to do something with the Civic Center, so at some point we're going to have to issue a bond, I'm assuming, unless we suddenly magically, someone wants to leave us some money. So we're going to have to figure out something, and there's no point to undo it until we know exactly what we're doing. At that point, maybe we could discuss it again, I guess my point. Thanks.
Alderman Steve Laurenti.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I appreciate the words of Alderman Estes, but I didn't mention his name when I said that there were some disingenuous comments made, but maybe he's outed himself there by responding to me directly and naming me. But the fact of the matter is, I was speaking to the fact that there were words that people said that if a catastrophe happened, we would need to have these funds together. Now, it doesn't matter who said it. It was said. I'm not going to name names. I don't think that's a professional way to handle these meetings. But the fact of the matter is, we have the ability to handle all of the things we need to do with the Vision Fund separately. Having them together, I understand fully why we brought them together, and we only brought them together when we were talking about the Blue Concept. The Blue Concept was a lot of money, and the only reason we brought that financing together was because of it. So, because the public has voted that down, it makes absolute sense then for us to dissolve this financing package. Okay, the package doesn't exist because it was voted down, but we still have the funds together, which were going to be used to pay for a civic center that just got voted down. So let's separate it, and if we need to bring it back together, we'll do so. Thank you. Alderman
Richie Nordstrom.
Thank you, Mayor, and I appreciate the latitude. Thank you. Mr. Laurenti, I think we could use the same rationale for going the other direction, to use your same language that you're using right now as justification for splitting it. I'm going to use the same wording that you're using to keep it together, because I think it makes more sense to keep it together at this point. And as has been suggested before, is that if something comes up in the future that needs to a consideration for splitting it apart, then we can do it. We just adopted this like in November, December, and now we're going to flip-flop again. The other part of it is it is always intelligent to take a look at cautionary judgments, meaning that if something disastrous happened, I even made the comments about it as well, because we all know what happened in 2008. There was a severe downturn in the economy. So it's very beneficial to take a look at the ups and downs that we have to deal with. And again, I'm just trying to keep it this simple, is that this changing things back and forth, it happens a little too much right now, and we need to keep it consistent. And so that's where I'm at.
Alderman Ron Weifenbach.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I appreciate it. This is probably my third time talking on this, but I can't simply... Fourth time? Okay. I can't simply understand why we can't understand the fact that it had nothing to do with interest rates. If we wouldn't have combined the funds, it had everything to do with debt service coverage. I mean, I think our finance officer spoke those words eloquently that said we were looking for 1.25% debt service coverage. He said if we have 1.25% debt service coverage now, we could do 146 million, I think the number was, at 1.25. It has nothing to do with the interest rates. Matter of fact, the interest rates were higher because we were doing COPS. If we would have done revenue bonds, the interest rates would be lower, which at $146 million, they would be lower. And I would not saying I advocate for 146 million. Trust me, I don't. But
When you say COPS, you mean certificates of
participation, the lease back. And so I just actually just sitting up here hearing myself talk because there's nobody listening. I mean, I think that she said it quite eloquently when she said our bond rating was increased in 2013 prior to any even thought of this. So, I mean, to say that there was better interest rates is wrong. Exactly to say there was worse interest rates is correct. And I'm just arguing to hear myself argue, I guess. Thank you.
Alderman Jerry Wright. Question's been called. Are there any objections to calling the question? Seeing no objections, we're going to proceed to the vote just to make sure everyone understands what the vote is. The vote is a substitute motion to deny first reading on Item 33, Ordinance 6046. A yes is to deny first reading and end discussion on this item. All in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? No. Roll call, please.
Drew. Lewis. Wright. Estes. Nordstrom. Roberts. Weifenbach. Lorente. Scott. I have 6-3.
Thank you. We are now on item 34. Chad Lewis. 34.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Item 34 is first reading of ordinance 6048, an ordinance to revise the membership and procedures of the Capital Improvements Committee by amending section 3.16.090 of the Rapid City Municipal Code. I move approval.
Second.
We have a motion by Lewis to approve and a second by Scott. Any discussion? Seeing none, all in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion carries. And we are now on item 35.
Item number 35 is first reading of ordinance 6009, an ordinance to adopt the 2012 International Residential Code by amending chapter 15.13 of the Rapid City Municipal Code. Move continuation of this item to the next Legal and Finance Committee.
We have a motion by Lewis to continue and a second by Amanda Scott. Any discussion?
Continue the floor.
You may.
Okay. Just because we're doing everything together, that's the next items for regarding this subject are at the next Legal and Finance. So that's my motion for that, rationale for that.
Any discussion? Alderman Steve Laurenti.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and if I can, obviously they don't have to answer, but I asked this question at the Legal and Finance meeting. I'm hoping that the public would hear some logical and solid reason why we're continuing this item, because the next item, as we discussed in Legal and Finance, basically needs 35. They're kind of connected, if you will. So I'm hoping one of my council members or one of the staff can tell us why we're continuing this. Thank you. Because I don't support continuing it. We need to make a decision. That's what we're here for. We've discussed this time and time again. The Black Hills Home Builders has supported 36, the compromise in 36, and 35 needs to be passed, so 36 can happen as well. So I won't vote for a continuation.
Any further discussion on 35 from staff or council? Seeing none, all in favor of continuation, please say aye. Aye. Opposed? Roll call, please.
Lewis. Wright. Estes. Nordstrom. Roberts. Wyffenbach. Lorente. Scott. Drew. 5-4.
The item is continued, correct? On a 5-4 vote? The item is continued. Okay. We're now on item number 36. Do we have a motion to approve or continue? Motion by
I have to read-
Wyffenbach.
I need to read it into the record at
Oh,
some
I'm
point.
sorry. I apologize. Go ahead.
Okay. First reading of ordinance 6050, an ordinance to amend provisions in the International Residential Code to address compressible shifting expansive soils by amending Chapter 15.13 of the Rapid Municipal Code. Move this item to the next Legal and Finance Committee as well.
We have a motion to continue to next Legal and Finance and a second by Scott. Any discussion? Alderman Steve Laurenti.
Thank you, Mayor. And again, I will not support continuing this item. It passed 4-1 in Legal and Finance, so I'm hoping at least those 4 are still there. Otherwise, I'd like to hear from one of the other 3 why they're not going to support approving it when they did it Legal and Finance, or from somebody else as to why we're not going to move forward with this expansive soils compromise, which was agreed on by the Black Hills builders and all of those people who are most affected. But I have, again, a feeling that we're not going to hear why we're continuing, but there is an 800-pound gorilla in here, and I think 1 or 2 of them or 3 of them are on the council, but I don't know if they're going to speak tonight or not. I hope they do.
Darla Drew.
Thank you, Mayor. I'll speak on this since I'm on Legal and Finance. I have reconsidered that vote. I've been talking to people that are in development, real estate, those kinds of things. This is a very complex issue. This is going to take us a little time to really dig into this, no pun intended, and really figure out what we're going to do, because soils can change, you know, within yards of each other. And so to make a real good decision on this right now, I think we can continue it. We can learn more about the situation. We can find out what we really need to do. Maybe it's an amendment like the Black Hills Builders representative was talking about tonight for different areas. But I really want to give us some time, give this council some time. This is a big issue. It's an important issue. And I don't think it's anything we should rush to judgment. We do have time, and we need to look at it seriously.
Alderman Brad Estes.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Mr. Mayor, last time I started asking questions, you got mad at me 2 weeks ago because...
Did I?
Yeah, because we were just talking about whether or not we were going to extend it 2 weeks. But, so can I?
Mad at you very often. So
I know it.
I won't get mad at you.
But 2 weeks ago, I talked about, I had a concern as how are we going to implement this thing? And I've, since then, I've talked to city staff and I've talked to 2 of the geotechnical companies in town, and may I ask Brad Solon some questions?
Sure.
If I may? Thanks.
Absolutely.
I'd really
Brad,
like to
come
know
on.
how this is going to work. Because I don't, first of all, I don't like seeing people build foundations on soil and have people's dreams be crumbled. But Brad, do you want me to ask you a specific question, or could you explain to me how this is going to work from your staff's perspective?
I can just explain it, I think. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'm Brad from Development Services. This is, after all the discussion, the 9 building board meetings, the 7 public hearings, the 5 of these hearings now, I think, what would occur is, without adding any fees, without adding any inspector, without adding any inspections, what would occur is, and based on part of what's in the ordinance amendment for the shifting soils, part of the agreement that came together was, with this amended ordinance, was to allow the builders to sign the contract on the home, get his building permit within a couple days or however long it takes, and start digging, and then at the footing inspection have the report. And then, of course, by that time, the over X, or whatever it was that the eval or the stated would be done. And so that would be handed to the inspector at the footing inspection. I don't know that anything would occur as far as the city inspection process is concerned. The ordinance was written in the compromise to aid the builder to be able to get started, dig the hole, do his soil eval, get a move on, and that's why it's written that way.
Okay, thank you. So the other day I was at your desk, front desk, and I was handed a sheet of paper because I had questioned how this, with the background I had questioned how this would happen with a 8.5 by 11 sheet of paper, and someone from your desk said, here's what we're talking about. A local geotechnical firm went out to a site, didn't do soil tests. They did a soil evaluation because that's what you're going to get if somebody's just looking at the dirt and footing. And then the geotech wrote a report and said, we've got this kind of soil, it meets this classification, and then for remedies it said over excavate, put X number of feet of engineered fill in. The fill must meet this specification, and it must meet these compactions, and it must meet this moisture content, and it must meet how the geotech writes it. My question is this, and nobody's been able to answer me. Okay, so we're trying to sell a higher level of security to the home buyer that their soil's been not tested but evaluated, and then there's been an evaluation report written, and then the report's being followed, and you're selling to the home buyer a higher level of security or some level of assurance or insurance on their part that has been done right. But so who's responsible? Let's say later on the house moves and they hire an attorney like Mr. Whalen, and they go back and they say, well, here's a report we did over excavated fill, and they say, well, who tested it? It said it had to be tested. It had to be this certain moisture content. It had to meet this compaction report. Please tell me how this is going to be administered. Who's responsible for making sure those tests are done?
I talked to one of the gentlemen that were at the building board meetings and testified, and I'm sorry that our expert witnesses, they didn't appear at Legal and Finance the other day, and they couldn't make it tonight either, but they are going to be at the next Legal and Finance meeting to offer, to take questions or whatever. Talked to the gentleman today, and what I got from him was he would do that. There would be a soils test. There would be the recommendation. They'd do observation, and then they would do some kind of a proctor to determine that the proper compaction had been done. And so, based on what he told me, I get the impression that the engineer, the professional, is going to be standing there saying, "Yeah, that they did it right."
Are we going to require? Is that part of the order? Are we going to require it that if a geotech guy writes a report and says this is what's got to be followed, then are we making sure? Are we going to make sure that he stays in the loop until everything's been followed?
Well, I think that at all the building board meetings with Mr. Boomsma, Boom Construction, and all those guys that were there, that they're concerned that we're not going to take baby steps on this, that they're going to take leaps and bounds, and it's not going to happen. There are, just like everybody said, there's a number of people that are opposed to this. There are a number of people that are very pleased that it's even being considered. So, is the city inspector could go out and do observations, do more inspections, things like that. That could occur, but that hasn't been part of the discussion.
In the sequence of events, what triggers them to have the foundation designed by a structural engineer? At what time would that?
Well, there's a variety of things here. You have to understand that we've talked about the soil on the west side and the soil on the east side, and the good soil and the bad soil. There's probably going to be times when you get a soil evaluation that says that the soil's good because you're on the west side, you're building on the red dirt. You don't just do it like you normally would.
Mm-hmm.
We wouldn't require an engineer drawing for that, if, you see what I'm saying? Now, what I'm thinking though is, once again, there's going to be a soil eval for somewhere down on Southeast Rapid, down by the landfill, for example, where it's just shale, that the soils engineer, being the professional, is going to make a recommendation and some kind of a design is going to be provided. Once again, we can require an engineer drawing for the foundation. We can do that. But once again, that hasn't been part of the discussion. If that's something that you want to do to require it, we can do that.
No, I'm just trying to, what I'm trying to understand is that if the geotech says this soil meets the criteria of expansive soil and you have to over excavate, then if they over excavate, then do they then revert right back to the minimum standards design, or do they not only have to excavate, does that trigger a structural engineer on the foundation? That's maybe the people in the legal and finance know that, but I haven't really gotten this, and I'm not against this. I'm trying to understand it. I mean, I'd like to be, if I'm going to vote for something, if I meet somebody at McDonald's tomorrow and they say, why'd you vote for it? I'd like to be able to explain to them how it's going to work. And I can't right now.
In the proposed alternative ordinance, let's call it,
okay,
the compromised one, it says right in there that foundation and floor slabs in buildings located on expansive soils as provided in 403.1.8.1 shall be designed by a design professional. I think you have to go back into the book, and I'm sorry I don't have my book with me, but I could sure have it at Legal and Finance in a couple of weeks and go over it, what that procedure would be.
Okay, I guess the mayor's tapping me on the shoulder, says Joel has a comment, so.
I'm sorry, it isn't about this issue, but in order to answer Alderman Laurenti's question, the way, and it has nothing to do with the substance of this ordinance, but since you continued item 35, the way that this amendment is written is it's an amendment to the 2012 building code. Well, you've continued the 2012 building code, so if you approve this tonight, it's going to create a problem because it's an amendment to the 2012 building code you've continued. So that would be why I would say you would continue it tonight, because essentially the item 35 either has to be approved first or at the same time for this to work.
Okay. You still have the floor, Brad.
I guess with that in mind, I'll yield, but I just, thank you. I'll talk to you off dais, thank you.
Alderman Chad Lewis.
That's actually what I was just going to point out. We're just voting on a continuation, not on the actual item itself, so, thanks.
I'd like to say I don't like to be referred
All in
to as-
favor of continuation, please say aye. Aye. Opposed? Item is continued. Item 37, Amanda Scott.
Thank you, Mayor. Item number 37 is a request by Renner and Associates LLC for DKEA LLC for a preliminary subdivision plan for lots 6 through 10 of Block 1, lots 6 through 11 of Block 2, and lots 1 through 6 of Block 3 of Red Rock Village subdivision, generally described as being located west of the intersection of Dunsmore Road and Tehama Street and Dunsmore Road. I make a motion to approve with stipulations.
Motion by Scott, second by Estes. Any discussion? Seeing none. All in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed, motion carries. Do we have a motion on items 38 through 96, all alcohol licenses? Motion by Lewis, second by Laurenti. Staff have any concerns on any of these items, or chiefs? No? Okay. All in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed, motion carries. Item number 97. Chad, can you read this in the record for us, and we'll yield to Mike.
Item number 97 is Insurance Services Office, Inc., releases Rapid City Public Protection Classification. Move to approve.
We'll go, we have a motion to acknowledge.
Acknowledge, yeah.
Motion to acknowledge, and do we have a second? Second. By Amanda Scott, and we'll go to our Fire Chief, Mike Maltevern. Good evening.
Okay, thank you, Mayor. Some good news after the great debate tonight. The Rapid City Fire Department had been recently evaluated by the Insurance Services Offices, or ISO Incorporated, and they do this for about 49,000 communities throughout the United States. They were in Rapid City late 2014 and then released their report to us in early 2015. And I'm proud to announce our ISO rating on a scale of 1 to 10 for Rapid City. We were sitting at a 3 and had been at a 3 for a number of years. Back in 2007, we ran the risk of actually going down in our rating, down to possibly a 4, maybe even a 5. And at the time, the council, with the support of the mayor at the time, did some things to improve the department's capabilities to keep us at a 3. So here they come 8 years later to reevaluate the department. And again, I'm proud to announce we went from a 3 to a 2. And there is a direct correlation that can be made that the better our rating is, potentially the better insurance premiums that people will pay. There's 9 of the largest, or the 9 of 10 largest insurance providers in the country use this analysis to help set their rates for property owners. So not exactly sure what it'll mean for each individual property owner, but they may be able to reach out to their insurance company and find out if their premium will indeed go down. Out of those 49,000 communities that are evaluated, there's currently only 800 that hold a Class 2 or better. So we're in about the top 1.7% of those 49,000 departments. So, and of course, it's because of the support of council and the mayor that we have the resources we have to protect the city. Thank you.
Any discussion? We'll go to Alderwoman Amanda Scott. Amanda?
Thank you, Mayor. May I ask Chief Maltaverne a question, please?
May.
Thank you. And Chief, thank you. A lot of the information contained on here, and it is great news. And kudos to your department and everybody that's worked towards this, because I know it's not just your department that works towards this. It takes a coordinated effort of everybody looking at the budget and picking those priorities and making sure that your staff and your support staff all get the resources that they need. But the primary question, since you did bring up and you touched on it, was that this new rating, improved rating, has the potential to actually affect our taxpayers on their properties, commercial, industrial, as well as residential. My main question is does this rating in any way give us other additional benefits like looking at our bonding or anything else? Or is it strictly just an national insurance rating thing?
It is. This is a private corporation, and then those underwriters subscribe to this company who goes out and does this analysis of fire protection for communities. And again, as you can see in the memo, they look at 3 broad categories: the way we handle our 911 calls through our dispatch center, the fire department, our hard skills and our training and all those types of things, and our resources that we have, and our where our stations are located, and then they also look at our water distribution system. Other than that, that is the benefit. It is one place where the fire department actually does show a return on the investment, and that's reduced insurance premiums.
Do you or your staff use this information when you do apply for grants and that type of stuff?
It is something that we can point out. However, we don't necessarily get much credit in terms of applying for grants or any other services. This is really something that's passed on to the taxpayer, and it certainly helps my case when I come and ask for additional resources. There's talks in here about additional staffing and stations and engines and things like that. And so if you saw a drastic change in our ISO rating and we started to go down back like we did in 2007, there was support from the council at the time. We need to keep this rating something a little more manageable because it is something that benefits the taxpayer.
Thank you, Chief.
Thank you.
And Mayor, if I could, just a comment, I know that your communications specialist, Daryl, does a great job trying to get word out. I think this is huge, especially when it can affect industrial, commercial, and residential rates. It would be great if Daryl could work on making sure that the media gets a hold of this information for all of our taxpayers. Thank you.
Would you talk about that real quick?
That release went out about 2 o'clock today and is already on KVN this evening. At least one of the stations. I'm non-biased, but
Thank you.
Thank you.
So that's great if we can get more word out. This is one of those things where unfortunately our taxpayers won't know to ask about unless it's brought to their attention. So thank you.
I'm sure it'll be an election
You
flag
watching
near
TV at a council meeting? Did you pull it up on your? Oh, okay. Confession time. All right. Any further discussion on item 97? All in favor of acknowledgement, please say aye. Aye. Opposed, motion carries. Public hearing is now open for items 98 through 107. Do not have any speaker request forms on any of those items. Have I missed anyone? Have I missed anyone? Last call. Okay. All right. Items 98 and 99, would anybody like to remove either of these items for separate consideration? Both are continuations to May 18. Ron Weifenbach.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. 99.
99 is being removed for separate consideration. This is a continuation item. We have a motion to approve 98. I'm sorry, to continue 98 until May 18. We have a motion by Lewis and a second by Scott to continue item 98 till May 18. All in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed, motion carries. Item 99, Amanda, would you read this into the record for us?
Thank you, Mayor. Item number 99 is the appeal of the Planning Commission's decision of a request by Epic Outdoor Advertising for a conditional use permit to replace an off-premise sign generally described as being located at 3425 Sturgis Road. I make a motion to continue to the May 18th, 2015 council meeting due to publication requirements.
Motion by Scott, second by Estes. We'll go to Alderman Ron Weifenbach.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. There's a lot of underlying issues that go to this one.
And be careful not to discuss them tonight because we're not in the hearing.
Yeah, what I'm saying though is as it's being continued, and I'm hoping that the councilman that would have questions on this, knowing tonight that it's going to be continued to the next meeting, that they maybe forward their questions to whoever they need to get them from, so when this comes forward, because I'm sure that people will have questions on it, and that this continuing things just to be continuing them without even really saying why you want to continue them or have a question that you want answered would really, because if we miss this due to the publication requirements, it's kind of on us to make sure it kind of gets expedited. So I think the one question, I will forward my questions to Joel, tomorrow or sometime this week to make sure that I have them. So I'm just urging my councilman to not come back on the 18th and continue it again.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Let's go to Brett Limbaugh briefly. Brett, did we miss publication requirements on this? And you and I have talked overall about when there's an appeal process and having to republish the item, and that does delay things for both for all sides involved. Would you mind addressing that issue real quick? And did we miss the boat on publication on this?
I don't believe we actually missed the publication requirement. It wasn't printed. And your concern is well taken. I think what we probably ought to do is if we are in a situation where cases can get continued, maybe perhaps what we do on our agenda is list that date for possible continuance. Therefore, we don't have to re-advertise in the paper. I'll have to get together with our attorneys and see if we can do that. But it'd be nice to have these things be a little bit more automatic, so in cases where our advertisements don't get published, we don't have that as a hiccup.
Thank you. Any further discussion? Ron Weifenbach.
Just to clarify, Mr. Mayor, so we didn't miss it, but it didn't get printed. I'm not sure I understand that.
The way it works is the Planning Commission's decision is final unless it's appealed. And if it's appealed, that triggers a hearing at the council level, and that's supposed to be published. So one of the ways that we're looking at is seeing if state law and city ordinance allows, when it's at the Planning Commission level, to say to the applicant and everybody involved, anybody can appeal this. And if this is appealed, it will be heard on X date at the city council, and that means you won't have to publish it again and delay the hearing for both sides down the road. Does that make sense?
Well, on this particular item, though,
it's just a general issue on all appeals to the council from the Planning Commission that involve a public hearing. Okay. Let's go to Joel Landine, if that's okay.
It was sent to the Journal, and the Journal did not publish it.
Thank you.
Oh, so the boat was missed.
No. Sometimes everybody makes mistakes. Sometimes we have made a mistake and not sent it over in time to get published on the right date. In this case, there are also situations where we do send it over and it gets missed and does not get published in the Journal, and this is one of them.
I agree, but ultimately it's our responsibility to make sure to the public that we get it. We have some kind of proofreading. And like you said, Joel, I understand stuff happens. But as long as we take accountability for it, I have no problem with that. I'm just saying we're not going to blame someone else for not publishing it. That's just ludicrous.
Well, but we don't get to preview the paper before it's published. I mean, we know when it's published and it isn't in there.
There's an opportunity that Brett Limbaugh is already looking into to try to set up a process when there's appeals from the Planning Commission that they don't have to be republished, so you don't have a 2-week delay. And that's being looked into. Any further discussion on this continuation? Motion is to continue to May 18. All in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion carries. We are on consent items 100 through 103. We have a motion to approve items 100 to 100. We have to pull 100.
103.
You want to pull 103? Okay. We have a motion to approve items 100 through 102. Motion by Lewis, second by here. Second by here. Second by Jerry Wright. All right. Any discussion on that? Does anybody in queue want to talk on those 3 items? No. All in favor, say aye. Aye. Really? On 100 to 102? Oh, sorry. No. Okay. All right. We're now on 103, and you have the privilege of reading this into the record.
Thank you, Mayor. Item number 103 is a resolution levying assessment for cleanup of miscellaneous property. I would like to yield the floor to the Finance Director.
Floor has been yielded to our Finance Officer, Pauline Sumption. Pauline?
Thank you. I just wanted to point out that we did receive a letter today from a lady that is on the list, number 4. I tried to email that out to you earlier, and I know I had a couple questions on it. You also have a copy at the dais for your perusal. I can understand where she's coming from. However, this is like a lien on the property, which goes with the property and not with the owner. So unfortunately, because of the timing of when we actually received the invoice from Cricket to the time that she took over the property in November to the time that we're now assessing it, ownership changed hands.
Okay. We do not have a motion, correct? Alderman Jerry Wright.
Would this possibly be covered by the title insurance? Because it was technically an assessment?
No, because the title company would not have known it was assessed until we approved this assessment roll.
Because it hadn't been filed, okay. That's what I wanted to clarify, thank you.
Steve Laurenti, you are encouraged to make a motion of some type.
I make a motion to approve.
We have a motion by Laurenti and a second by Roberts. Do you want to retain the floor?
I would, thank you, Mayor. And I was one of the people that had a few questions on this with the finance officer, and maybe legal, Joel could weigh on this, Mr. Mayor, if I can ask these questions. But this is more of a policy which is related to this. My question had to do with the fact that, well, and granted what's been said has raised another question, and I'm going to ask Pauline this question if you can, please. If the new owner had done a lien search at the time that she purchased it, would this have been listed there?
No, it would not. It actually gets listed 30 days after we approve the assessment roll because they are given 30 days to pay interest-free.
So if the owner actually did, and I don't know if the owner had a lien search done or not, the new owner, but it's unfortunate that she would have gone through the due diligence and still would have been hit with this. But my only other question that I had, and maybe Joel could answer this question based on your response, Pauline, was that if we had an owner who owned multiple properties in Rapid City, in fact, owned this one, of course it went through foreclosure, they no longer own that property, but they're still the property owner of other properties, there's no way that we can assess those charges to the properties that they own?
No.
Very good. That's easy enough. That's what I wanted to hear. Thank you.
Any further discussion on the motion on item 103? Motion is for approval. All in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion carries. We are now on non-consent public hearing items 104 through 107. Item 104, Chad Lewis.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Item number 104 is the second reading of ordinance 6043, an ordinance is amending section 17.06 of chapter 17 of the Rapid City Municipal Code, rezoning the within described property as requested by Advanced Engineering for TJ Wantanovitz for rezoning the low density to residential District 1 to low density residential District 2, for the properly generally described as being located east of the intersection of Hofer and Churchill Street. I move approval.
Motion by Lewis, second by Nordstrom. Any discussion? Seeing none, all in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed, motion carries. Item 105.
Second reading of ordinance 6044, an ordinance amending section 17.06 of chapter 17 of the Rapid City Municipal Code, rezoning within described property is requested by Larry and Mary Stevens for rezoning from General Agricultural District to Park Forest District, properly generally described as being located at 4784, Enchanted Pines Drive. I move approval.
Second.
Motion by Lewis, second by Drew. Any discussion? Seeing none, all in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed, motion carries. We now are in the entomological section of the agenda.
Item number 106, second reading of ordinance 6013, an ordinance permitting to permit hobby beekeeping in residential areas by amending sections 17.04.035, 17.08.020, and 17.10.020 of the Rapid Municipal Code. I move approval.
We have a motion by Lewis and a second by Laurenti. If you'd like to buzz in, please hit your lights. Jerry Wright.
Bzzz. That's my invitation. Okay. The question was raised at their last meeting on this issue, and I just want the council to fully discuss it as appropriate, that if we have an issue currently without a license, we would be going through code enforcement, which will take, I believe, several weeks or longer to get action done to correct the situation. Right? I may ask that of the city attorney. Is that true?
That's correct.
So if we have a situation where we have, say, a owner of bees, and I don't think it's an issue, and I support the ordinance, don't get me wrong, I do. But I think that if we have a situation where there is a potential reaction to a bee sting in an area, just say there is that, how do we correct that situation quickly or respond to it quickly in a responsive way to protect the public health and safety if necessary? And I find it probably very rare. But if we don't have, and I know we talked about this on the licensing situation, if we have a license, and my understanding is we could respond much more quickly, correct? How much quicker would it be?
You know, I guess I haven't quantified it. There's processes. There are ways that if, depending on the threat it posed to health or public safety, which is always going to be somewhat subjective, we could potentially abate it immediately. But again, there's going to be probably disagreement over, you know, the person complaining may think it's an immediate threat that needs to be dealt with immediately, and staff or other people may think, well, it's not something that needs to be dealt with immediately. So, you know, there may be ways to deal with it more quickly. I would say with a license, you know, the perception would be that it would be easier, but I guess I would want to give that more thought before I tried to quantify it.
One more question on this then is, lost my train of thought. I apologize. I'll come back.
Thank you. We'll make a beeline to Steve Laurenti.
Oh, my God. Awesome. Thank you, Mr. Mayor, for that. I appreciate
You're
that
welcome.
segue. And maybe this will help answer Jerry's Alderman Wright's concerns. But the fact of the matter is, beekeepers have been in Rapid City for a really long time, much like the pigeon loft owners and probably even some chicken owners against the law. But the fact of the matter is, this is going to be a surprise to some, but the beekeeper group has policed themselves for a long, long time before government got involved with it with this ordinance. This is, in my opinion, just an acknowledgement of the fact that they exist. So I believe if there's any problem with the bees or swarms, the beekeeping group has been taking care of this long before government put its nose in there. So I have a feeling that they'll handle it just like they always have, even withstanding government's intrusion. Thank you.
Alderman Jerry Wright.
My mind kicked back in. Thank you. We also had chickens in our backyard, and I lived in Rapid City centuries ago. The point I had was on the licensing. Is it also possible you could issue a license that would be automatically renewed, or a permanent license as long as it's issued to a person at a residence or at a location, and it would only be null and void if pulled by the council. So, I mean, they're not renewing it all the time. It's just basically issued. Is that possible? Joel?
I'm sorry, what was?
So can we issue basically a permanent license that's automatically renewed unless there's reasons for it not to be?
Yeah, we can look at that. I mean, again, I think it was Alderman Weifenbach who said, a lot of people probably aren't going to get licensed anyway, and I don't know that I dispute that, but if they aren't licensed, then that, and somebody makes a complaint, that at least gives us a basis for enforcement if they're not licensed. But we could look at that, just something that, authorizes them, if that's what you're looking for, to say, you have the ability to have bees, and then if you're not following the rules, we can take away your ability without going through
Deny your license.
a more lengthy court process.
Now, the other question I'm going to ask is that if we pass the ordinance, which I support, the licensing thing, if we do develop issues later, we could bring it up and enact it later, correct?
Sure.
Okay, thank you.
Alderman Ron Weifenbach.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Well, I did mention that. I just have a question for Mr. Landine, and my question would be, is when's the last time we've withdrawn someone's license for their animal, for their dog or whatever?
I can't recall a time.
Probably never. Thanks.
Any further discussion on item 106? All in favor, say aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion carries. Item 107.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and no bee jokes this time. Second reading of ordinance 6010, an ordinance to regulate hobby beekeeping by adopting chapter 6.20 of the Rapid Municipal Code. I move approval.
Second.
Motion by Lewis, second by Drew, and I feel stung by the length of the debate. So, any discussion? All in favor, say aye.
Voted.
Opposed? Motion carries, and for all of the Scrabble players out there, the word apiary is now officially part of the city code. So, we're now on item 108, bill list. Pauline Sumption.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. We do have an addition to the bill list for Wells Fargo Equipment Finance in the amount of $81,667.11, bringing the new bill list total to $7,633,580.03.
Motion by Laurenti, second by Nordstrom. Any discussion? Seeing none, all in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed, motion carries. We have a motion to adjourn. Motion by Scott, second by Drew. All in favor say aye. Opposed, motion carries. We are adjourned 8:30 p.m. Have a great evening, everyone.